This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation.
But this is the first time in my professional career that everybody, 100% of us, are consciously aware we are engaged in a change initiative.
Yeah, everything. I mean, COVID caused us all to go through change, right? At the same time, but our experiences were so different.
Facing these unprecedented times in isolation is pure insanity.
Today, we're talking with Ben Baker. Too many of us focus on communicating our value outside our organization. The challenge is, if people inside your organization do not understand and believe in your story, what you do and why you do it, and who you do it for, why should they care? They won't be able to communicate it to clients, prospects, or vendors. For more than a quarter century, Ben has been helping organizations tell their story, build cultures around it, share their vision, mission, and goals, and drive change, all through developing more effective internal communication strategies and processes. Ben is the author of 2 books, Powerful Personal Brands, a hands-on guide to understanding yours, and Leading Beyond a Crisis, a conversation about what's next, and has been podcasting for more than a decade.
What I really like about Ben's style is that he has a way through story of drawing us into the conversation, and it's easy to see how he could do that at all levels of an organization. We hear lip service, every voice matters, but with Ben Baker, it's clear that it's true.
What I really love, Ben, about your podcast program is that you can build so many activities and reinforcements around that podcast. So you can have for a manager, for a team, a packet of things to do to take that information forward. Hey, listen to this podcast, but it doesn't stop there, right? It's that feedback loop that we talked about being so important. Doesn't stop. Have a conversation, a one-on-one, a small team, an activity, a learning, something, but it can all anchor around those podcast episodes. I love it.
Good afternoon, Ben. Thanks for joining us.
Tom, Adrian, thanks for having me on. This is going to be a fun interview, so I can't wait to get started.
Oh my God, it's going to be so much fun. It's been a long time that we've been talking and we've never hit record once. So I'm so glad we're doing that.
Did we hit record? Did we make sure we hit record?
We did
You're
hit
happening.
record.
The NSA is listening, so behave yourself, Ben Baker.
I refuse to compromise.
We got disclaimers. It's all good.
Oh, okay, that's good.
So Ben, we know the story, but please tell us, you have made a career out of helping people with crummy communication, help them do it better. Tell us a little bit about how you got there and how you help them.
Well, let's start before get into communication.
All right.
27 years ago, I became an ex-propeller head. I was in high-tech sales. I was literally flying around North America. I was the George Clooney, where I would get up in the morning, go to the airport. I had no idea where I was going next. I was literally 200 days in the air. When flight crews know you by name and they give you the gears as you come through down the gangway, you fly too much. So yeah. I realized at the time it was a divorce waiting to happen. My wife and I had just gotten married. This was not going to work. And I went up to my boss and said, look, double my salary to pay for my divorce or cut my travel days in half. These are your choices. He says, why don't we buy you out? I said, done. He says, you haven't even heard the proposal yet. I said, I don't care. And what I did is he gave me 6 months after I found my replacement. I flew him around North America. I introduced him to everybody, and I got a 6-month override to sit there and say, you know what, I've done my duty. And the best thing that I got part of the package was, what do you want to be when you grew up training? Mm-hmm. And I went through a battery of tests. I had industrial psychologists took me through 3 days of testing. And he says, you're a storyteller. You've always been a storyteller. You are a storyteller. And what you're really good at is enabling other people to tell their story. And I went, great. What do I do with it? He says, I don't know. I said, okay, we'll figure this out. And I started playing a lot of golf because I had time on my hands. And I met this guy in the direct mail business. And he goes, look, we're looking for people that have a technical background, that understand how to tell stories, understand brand, and are comfortable dealing with multinational corporations. I said, well, that's me. So I got thrown into the direct mail business. And the great thing about it is I was dealing with casinos and grocery chains. So all of it is, these guys started out being extremely reactive. Oh my God, our competitor's doing this. We need to do this. It's Mother's Day. We need to come up with something. Okay, we have 3 days to do it. And I got these guys to sit there and say, okay, let's figure out what your brand is. What differentiates you from your competitors? What's the hill you're willing to die on? What is the thing that makes you special to your clients? Now let's build a year's worth of calendar to be able to create direct mail that's going to make other people chase you instead of you chasing them. And so I did that for years and had a really great time. And, as everybody knows, the direct mail business, for better or for worse, kind of died. And, I got into email marketing and we got into trade show development, and there's always been brand development along the way. But about 10 years ago, I realized, I started looking at things like, you know what? Companies are really good at telling their story outside their organization. They're horrific at telling their story inside their organization.
It's so true.
And that's where I was, because you get people inside the company that have no idea what the branding initiative is, what the brand is. Why do they do what, and why should they care? And it's led to some really interesting work to be able to get people aligned with the vision, or aligned with the goal, aligned with change management, to be able to sit there and say, I get it. This is where we are. This is where we're going. This is why I matter. This is why I should get in the boat and row. And this is why I should be excited about getting into the boat and rowing. And that's been a lot of fun. So that's where I've come over the last, 27 years. And that's where I am today.
Well, I had the thought when you were talking about connecting the dots.
Mm-hmm.
And in talent optimization, we use too big of a word, alignment, sometimes, and you use the word alignment. But when you think about a corporation, it just means a body,
right,
and a body that's supposed to be living together. And we know the nose doesn't do the hand work, but we know how important it is when the nose isn't working. When you use that word and internal communication, and the word change, so we've set up some dots to connect.
Yeah.
And speak a little bit about what isn't happening on a change initiative that makes the dots pull their separate ways, or not care. Use the word care, which means disengagement, if we use fancy corporate speak.
Yeah, I mean, what is engagement within corporations today is at an all-time low. I mean, you have people say there's as little as 10% engagement within organizations, depending on how you define the word. But the challenge is when it comes to change management, there's a couple of big issues. The first is change happens at its inception in very small rooms with a very short number of people. And over 6 or 8 months or a year's worth of time, that small group of people buys into the idea, they do the budgets, they figure it out, they understand where they're going, and they're bought in. And then all of a sudden, they go and they say, we're going to change to the rest of the organization. And the rest of the organization go, wait a second, where did this come from?
And we didn't know what we were doing in the first place.
We didn't know what we were doing in the first
what?
place. Exactly. We didn't know what we were doing in the first place. Now we're changing. Why are we changing? Hang on a second. What does this mean to my job? What does this mean for my family? What does this mean about the group of people that I work with on a regular basis? And what does this mean for our customers? What does this mean for the way I come to work every morning? And people hate change. People are scared of it because they don't know where they're going. That's why horror movies do so well, because people are scared of the dark. People are scared of what's around that corner because they don't know what's coming. And when organizations...
And that's it. It's not the change they're afraid of. It's the not knowing, right?
It's the not knowing.
Out of control. They have no control.
Exactly.
It's coming at them, and they're not
it's happening to them, not with them.
Yeah, right.
And when we can create communication around change and make sure that people understand that this is happening with them and not to them, and this is how they benefit, and this is how they're part of the process, and this is what the promised land looks like. When we come out the other side, this is what we're going to be able to do that we can't do now. People will align with that change because there isn't that scary thing around the corner anymore. It's that they go, oh, okay, we're heading towards this light. The people in the small room already knew there was that light, but they didn't know how to communicate it. And when they don't communicate it, they create fear and trepidation and disengagement, mistrust, and all of a sudden, great minds say, I'm out of here, and they run for the hills because they don't see where they're going.
Yep. So many times I've worked with leaders the ones who are in the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
Figuring it out. And they, because they have been with that idea for a long time, they just come out the door and they're like, what's the point in sharing any of that? Like, let's just get going. Like, well, wait, you've been in that room for 6 months, a year, whatever, on your whiteboards, drafting things out, right? And they don't want to back up to tell the front end of that story, and that's so critical.
Well, they're on step 32.
Yep.
And everybody else outside that room is on step 0.
Mm-hmm.
And they're expecting everybody to go from 0 to 32 in a second, over rev the engine and blow the engine, instead of sitting there ramping it up slow. It doesn't have to be another 6 months or a year to get everybody on board, but you have to rev that engine up a little bit before you can hit gas without blowing a rod.
Yeah.
Address listening in there. So they're on step 32. They're pushing out communication. Address the importance before we get to the idea of internal branding and podcasting. Mm-hmm. Where does listening fit in?
Listening is critical. Listening is absolutely critical because, first of all, just because you said something doesn't mean it's understood. How many times have we been in a room full of people, we've made a statement, and you get these nods. People are nodding. And it doesn't mean they agree. It doesn't mean that they're aligned with you. It just means that they're nodding. It's just people are acquiescing. And as soon as you leave the room, they say, do you understand what they meant? No, I didn't understand what they meant. I didn't want to feel stupid. I didn't want to ask the question, or that was the stupidest thing I ever heard of. I'm not doing that. No, you do it. No, I'm not doing that.
And anyone with a 10-year-old can relate to that.
Exactly. So when you listen to see, are people understanding what you have to say? Are they aligned with what you have to say? Do they have any questions? Do they see how this benefits them? Do they see the direction that you're going? And do they see the promised line or the light at the end of the tunnel? You have a far better chance of it being adopted than if you just assume that because I said something, people are going to understand it. Because most of the times they don't, because even if you said it once, that's the first time they've heard it. They need time to chew on. Most people are analytical to some degree, and they need to chew on it. And they need to sit there and go, let me think about this for 24 hours, and then I'm going to come back to you with a bunch of questions. Instead of everybody raising their hand all at once.
And they need to chew on it, especially anytime you're introducing an organizational change, small or big, it makes an employee reassess down to their basic needs, right? Is my job at risk? Mm-hmm. Meaning, can I continue to have the food and the shelter and the security, right? Things you don't care about until somebody goes, we're going to shake it up around here. Now you need reassertion that, yes, okay, wait, my job's okay. Is it okay? Mm-hmm. And so many times we forget that feedback loop. We say it like we don't create we don't create real feedback loops, not hey, send an email at the bottom of send an email here. Let me know if you have questions.
That's right. There's a suggestion box. Loop. Just put your thing in the suggestion box. Would you please? I'll get around to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you have any stories about somebody who's done that, who's a huge, wonderful communication campaign and no feedback loop? No real one.
I mean, there's hundreds of them. I mean, everything from automation being brought into buildings, and the union finds out about it at the last minute. And the truth of the matter is that automation is brought in to reduce, workforce by 30%. That's what it's there for.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, the union has said, wait a second, where's the retraining of our members? Where's that, where's our job security? Where's this? Where's that? And all of a sudden that equipment coming in either gets sabotaged or it gets waylaid, being set up, or there's, it gets slow played, or all of a sudden there's a million things that can go on to be able to do that. Take Chat GPT right now. People are terrified right now because there's companies that are saying, well, we're going to be bringing Chat GPT into the workforce. Well, I don't understand Chat GPT. Does that mean my job is being eliminated? What is that going to mean for my kids going to private school? I got university I got to pay for in a couple of years. My wife wants us to go on vacation next week. Should I be out looking for another job? Are they going to train me on this? I mean, there's a million things that people go through their minds in a millisecond. This is not over a period of days, weeks, or months. This is over a millisecond. All those thoughts are going through their heads at the same time. And when people are, have trepidation, they slow play, and they block, and they obfuscate, and and all of a sudden, things get, projects just get waylaid because it's just not convenient for me to get to it right now. And it's amazing how that stuff gets blocked and slowed down because it's not introduced properly and it's not communicated properly.
Well, I'd like to have, for just a moment, even though it might be hard, suspend your disbelief. But I am an executive who really believes that my people's voice should be in the mix in this change initiative.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also pressured to move quickly and tempted just to push through, as I've always pushed through. And the suggestion box is ignored. We tried that. How can I and my team, not just me, but I'm the one who says, if we are going to talk about inclusion and we're having this change and we don't know what people are thinking, feeling, or going to do, and we want to retain the best talent, so you're suspending your disbelief, where do I start?
Do what Sam Walton did, management by walking around. I mean, I seriously believe that too many leaders at all different levels sit at their desk in front of a computer, analyzing statistics and analytics, and make their decisions based on algorithms, instead of actually taking the time to walk around or have a meeting or Zoom chat or whatever and say, what do you think? Not giving their opinion at all. I mean, the best meetings that happen when you're trying to bring a new initiative in is the person who's leading the meeting keeps their mouth shut until the very end. They sit there and say, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Makes that more difficult because people are zoomed out, and now all of a sudden you've got the CEO saying, I just want to have a chat with you, Adrian. And she's going, oh my God, because she has all that stuff going on. It's hard to walk out on the shop floor because there is no shop floor.
You know what? You got to be creative. You have to find ways to first of all, to earn the trust of the people that you do, and get them to realize that, you know what, you're trying to make a decision, but you don't want to make it without them. That it's going to affect them, and I'd really like to hear your opinion. And I don't need 30 minutes of your time. I need 5. And keep it to 5. And it's a matter of valuing the idea that everybody is busy. Everybody's got too much on their plate. But it's important. Say, hey, listen, this is important. We're trying to make this decision. I need to gain 6 or 10 people's opinions from throughout the company to be able to sit there and say, are we on the right track? I'd really like 5 minutes of your time. And I want an honest opinion. And that's the key thing. You need to be able to have the permission to get somebody to tell you that this, excuse the expression, sucks. And it's stupid, and this is why. And not take that personally as a leader, and sit there and say, okay, why do they think that this is a bad idea? And what would they do better? And I think you need to be able to sit there and we all have these sacred children that walk on our shoulder. And it says, I came up with this idea, it's perfect. No idea is perfect. Ego. And I think that we need, as ideas, is to be able to sit there and listen to people throughout our organization and sit there and say, you know what, that was a great idea. I never would have thought of that. That makes it better. Or, okay, if they're thinking this, There's probably 50 other people that are thinking about this. I need to be able to communicate. If we are going to go the way I am, we need to communicate why we're going this way, because there's going to be people that are going to try to block this.
So I'm going to go back to our first question, because I'm teaching an organizational development course right now. So what we're doing is we're studying all these pioneers, these social scientists, right, who came up with all these things that we've just said 60 years ago.
Yep.
Why are we still talking about it? Why is this so hard to implement?
I think it's hard because humans are the X factor. We really are. I mean, you can't take emotion out of the situation. We are one human being. We are, whether we're coming from the house to the office, or the office to the house, we bring all of us with us wherever we are. And if we just had, a knockdown, drag out, argument with our boss, we're probably going to bring that home with us. And hopefully it doesn't mean that we blow up at our spouse, but that's stewing in the back of our mind. Same thing if we're having trouble with our kids, that those challenges are going to come into the office, and they're going to taint our emotions. And we come to whatever situation we are in at that moment based on where we've been. It's the collaboration, and my education up to this point in time is different from Tom's, is different from yours, Adrian. We all have a different history. We all have a different way of thinking it. And my ideas of right and wrong are different from your ideas of right and wrong. My ideas of what ideal looks like are different from both of yours. Doesn't make mine right, doesn't make yours wrong. It makes them different based on where we came from. And because if you get 1,000 people in an office, all with their own sets of nuances, that's what leads to the complexity.
So what we would call that is a people strategy, and where we are aligned, or if you did one of those Venn diagrams, is we want to be concerned about how they're wired, how they work, but we also want to be concerned about their value structures. And the definition of ethical influence is positioning the value you bring against what they care about. And most leadership communication isn't bad. In fact, they might hire someone as good as Monitor to write it. It's well written, but it's poorly positioned against their real world. Beautifully written, poorly positioned.
Yeah, and what works for my organization may not work for yours. I mean, I get customers say all the time, well, what's the best practices on this? I said, it doesn't matter. It's what's the best practices for your organization.
Here's where I'm intrigued about the idea of an internal podcast. And I'd like to hear more about that, because if I'll be that CEO, and Adrian's like, that'll never happen, I'm working for you. But I said, suspend disbelief. If I were that sincere person, I know that I can't have all those conversations. But if I get them talking to one another, and there's enough trust that little groups of them can have conversations about their fears, their aspirations, their doubts, their unique, even their recipes when they're cooking on the Lunch and Learn, whatever it might be. I just love the idea, since we can't all be in the same room, of using broadcasting not just to push out messages, but to draw in messages. So I'll shut up and ask you about internal podcasts.
Well, let's get started. What internal podcasts are podcasts that are designed for your teams only. They're behind a secure network, and the design of them is to allow for that open and honest and frank conversation where the information stays within the company. And this works for companies 1,000, 5,000, 50,000, 100,000, 2 million people, because when you're dealing with the size of these companies, you're dealing with asynchronous communication. You're dealing with the fact that they're either across a state or across the country or across the world in different time zones and different shifts, etc. And it enables people to have access to information when it's convenient for them. So people can have access to that information, whatever, what it allows you to do is to be able to talk about a variety of different subjects, whether it's a change going on within the company, whether it's health and safety, whether it's new product development. There's all sorts of different things that you can talk about, pricing, etc., and enable people to understand, okay, this is not only how it affects me and my part of the company, but this is how it affects other people in the different organizations. And people in, Tulane, France can understand what's happening in Beijing, or they can understand what's happening in Louisiana. And they may never meet these people, but at least they're able to listen to it. And what this is, it's a conversation starter. You have the conversations, you talk about whatever conversation is, and then it becomes a place where people can either talk on the Slack channel and extenuate the conversation, or they can talk, within their teams meetings, or, in small groups at luncheon, or leaders can sit there and say, hey, listen, I'd love the fact for you guys to listen to this particular podcast episode, and I want to talk to you about how that's going to affect us moving forward for the next 6 or 8 months. And it allows for the conversation to be stimulated and extenuated. So I think that that's a really powerful thing with internal podcasts.
And what does it take from a technology perspective to pull that off?
It really depends on a bunch of different levels. For the first thing you need a great host. And I don't mean to belittle that, but you need somebody that can understand business from all different levels of a company and be able to understand the breadth of an organization, the dynamics. And you don't have one person within the company who is the boss's boss's boss of this person being interviewed. Because if this person's being interviewed by their boss's boss's boss, they're not going to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to have somebody that doesn't have skin in the game. Hiring a professional, this is what we do. Hiring a professional from outside your company who has years of podcasting experience. They know how to ask articulate questions. They understand corporate dynamics and have the ability to be able to say, okay, this relates to this, relates to this, relates to this, relates to
and
this.
no agenda.
With no agenda.
Right.
Makes it a lot better.
Trust.
Yeah. And then you have technology issues with dealing with, okay, do we want this thing to be audio and visual? Do we want this thing to be translated in multiple languages because you have 15 different languages around the world you need to deal with? You need to deal with what level of security do you need on the podcast based on, if you're an aerospace company like Boeing, and you're dealing with very sensitive, secrets, the level of security you're going to want on this podcast is going to be far more dramatic than if it's, some other organization. But it depends. If you're dealing with government and military secrets, your level of communication, your level of podcast security has got to be far greater than in other organizations. So there's a dynamic range of things in terms of technology that you need to be thinking about, but it all depends on what are your particular needs as an organization.
Yeah, it's when I think about implementing these for some clients that I work with, often they'd scoff at the idea, right? Mm-hmm. Because it just feels like a lift, and it's not really that much of a lift. And then now I actually do have one client I'm working with who hasn't done this with me, but I bumped into a series that they did. I'm like, oh, look at that. They didn't call it an internal podcast, right? But they had a series.
Yeah.
They were rolling out an initiative and they had a series where they talked to different leaders. I'm like, okay. And it was just, Zoom.
Exactly.
Recorded and posted.
Yeah. And it can be that simple.
Mm-hmm.
My first response when I heard you talk about this was, this is so obvious, and I had never thought of it. It just seemed obvious. And you can start really small. And I also thought that it's an introvert's dream too, because they may not want to be a guest on the podcast, but you could have a conversation and you could have someone saying, on my team, Anna was really passionate, provided you had her permission. And she gets her voice in the mix. So There's a lot of ways to do it and have a facilitator of the process, but not always to be the host. And you're right, the host would have to organize it and make sure it's fitting the overall theme, but you could have lots of ways, because it's so easy for people to hit record on their iPhone, and you could do a little montage and just pass it around a meeting.
Oh, yeah.
I love the idea.
I mean, we looked at a company, and we didn't end up going ahead with this because they ended up hiring a new CEO and everything got backed up for 2 years. But we were looking at a company that was a 50,000 employee company that bought a company that was 8,000 employees. And there was a huge culture shift between the two organizations. And we looked at it and said, okay, what is it going to cost you on average to be able to onboard these 8,000 people? It said somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 a person. I said, okay, depending on whether they have to fly them in, whether, how much time is it, time out of the office, all the cost that goes along with it. I said, what if we did a podcast that talked to these people and talked to their new bosses and their new departments and talk to the culture people and the DEI and all the different departments and said, this is where we are in this, and be able to build that cultural bridge between the old company and the new company in a 52-week podcast format. So over a year, we would create this situation, and they absolutely loved it. No, it wasn't going to be cheap, but it was going to be 10% of what it was going to cost to do it on traditional onboarding.
And
it was going to be far more impactful.
Mm-hmm. I want to highlight a point that you made, a 52-week initiative. That is something that is often also a mistake of, let's roll this out in 2 months, 3 months, whatever, where these kinds of changes, total system changes, right, take time.
Yes,
and
they do.
They take time. So for a true transformation, it takes time, and there's no way around it. You cannot shortcut that.
And you want to talk about what happens in the 3 or 4 months before the changeover. You want to happen about the 3 to 6 months during the changeover, and then you want to talk about the impact of it afterwards.
Yep.
So therefore, people learn over time. People learn because they hear things repeated time and time and time again. Do you know why billboards work? Because you pay attention to them the 5,000th time you've seen it.
Repetition.
It's the repetition. It's not the first time you see a billboard. It's I'm gonna call. It's the it's the 300th or 400th or 500th time you've driven past that exact same billboard, and says, you know what, I should give these guys a call. And that's how these programs build, because not only are you listening to each episode once, but you have the ability to go back. That's the beautiful thing about a podcast versus a webinar, is that there's this repository of information that can now be used for parts of it for social media. It can be utilized by learning and development. It can be used by marketing department. It can be used by the training department. There's all sorts of different things that can come out of this information. It's not just a podcast, it's content that can be utilized throughout the organization for other things.
Well, we have run out of time. I knew this would happen. I've got lots of questions bubbling. So we'll just leave you with an open-ended question about how to use your brand marketing for cultivating a leadership beyond.
For me, it's a conversation. There is no silver bullet. There's no box. It all starts with a conversation, and I give everybody 30 minutes for free. If you go to my website and you go to yourbrandmarketing.com, you can book 30 minutes with me for free. Let's talk about what your needs are, what your desires are, what your challenges are, what your goals are. And let's see if there's a fit. Because for me, it's about designing programs that work for you and things that are going to help you move your needle and help you make your people shine. And that's what I want to do. So go to yourbrandmarketing.com, book a 30-minute appointment. And you know what? I'm happy to have those conversations.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
That's a power-packed 30-minute discussion too. You'll for sure get something
out
of
it
60, every time.
I know that. We got 30, we want 60. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
It's been fun. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.